In a recent study of 77 deceased hockey players, 54% of the players had CTE, including Hockey Hall of Famer Bobby Hull. The study linked playing ice hockey for long periods can increase the player's odds of developing CTE later in life. One concussion can cause a lifetime of problems. Concussions are brain injuries where the brain is rattled in the skull. They can occur in many different instances, such as a hit to the head, a fall, or even a contact hit that wasn't to the head. All of these can happen in hockey. Repeated concussions can lead to chronic traumatic encephalopathy, also known as CTE, which is more complex than concussions. The difference between concussions and CTE is that concussions happen when the brain moves rapidly within the skull, and CTE is caused when a tissue called the towel misfolds, causing the tissue to slowly kill brain cells. CTE does not exist in hockey only. It has been observed in the brains of soldiers, boxers, and football players, among others. One of the main struggles with CTE is that the condition has similar symptoms to Alzheimer's disease and dementia, and the disease can only be diagnosed after death. This makes it hard to track. When someone gets a concussion, their brain moves rapidly in their skull, and the movement can alter the shape of the brain, which could result in damaged brain cells. According to the Concussion Foundation, such cellular damages can lead to chemical and metabolic changes within the brain, making it more difficult for cells to function and communicate. In the context of hockey, a major question remains: is contact the main reason for concussions in the sport, or do athletes sustain concussions beyond contact plays?
Can I give the simple answer and say stop playing to contact? Right? I mean, that would be the way to remove it. I mean, it seems like there are more rules governing violence in sport broadly, right? And I think we're starting to see those changes within hockey also. And until you remove contact, until you remove violent collisions from the sport and the activity, you're not going to be able to remove the risk.
I think there's a very big misconception on you only get concussions by being checked. My son never gets checked. Nobody considers the fact that he's getting pucks chucked at his head. If there's a breakaway and the kid ends up misstepping, he could easily crash into him and he can go flying backwards and his head could hit the post. There's all kinds of things that could happen. Nobody thinks of that because they only associate concussions with being checked in hockey.
I think of the situation where, Wayne Simmons and I collided and he hit my chin. I was looking one way, he was looking the other way, and just kind of both ran into each other, and I don't know if there's anything we can really do about that. I don't even think it's necessarily a penalty on him. Like, he wasn't intentionally trying to do it either. So at the same time, I think there are little things, obviously being protective of how you're hitting, where you're hitting. I think they're doing a good job as far as, like trying to take out blindside hits and any contact to the head, through hits are being penalized more than what they used to be. I think there's definitely, a swing that way, but at the same time, I think there are instances where, there's not a whole lot that you can do in those situations.
Stephanie and Andrew Galligan are the parents of young hockey player Aiden, who suffered from a concussion in 2023. Both Stephanie and Andrew are in their early 40s and live in Tampa, Florida. Stephanie is a lawyer and Andrew is a pediatrician.
He didn't know what day it was 3 days later. But it's the second hit that you really have to worry about, because it's like your brain rattling around in your skull and the bruising, and it can heal. But if it has like a 1, 2, 3 punch, typically within the same 6-month period, you're at real risk for long-term damage. He was like living in a dark cave, like out of commission, not in school, barely functional for like at least 10 days, probably 2 weeks. And then he got back to normal slowly. They say it can take up to 6 months to heal, but at least for like a month, he was off for sure.
It was obviously headache and pain. He had a little bit of like light sensitivity. And then in the coming like days and weeks after, some balance issues. So he's pretty, solid on his feet, but you could tell he's a little off with that. And then just a little bit, kind of problems with not memory, but just how his brain was like maybe a little bit slower with functioning.
Jacob Weaver is a former amateur hockey goalie. Weaver suffered from 8 concussions in his 12-year career, each with different symptoms. Weaver is a 21-year-old server who's based in Brandon, Florida.
I had a couple where I blacked out, so that was like an instant grade 3, but those would take, I'd probably sit in my room mostly all day in the dark, sleep, eat, and then take ibuprofen and stuff until it finally everything, the symptoms subsided, I was able to slowly start getting back into regular life. And then usually like 2 weeks after that, I'd finally start picking back up on the ice. But it would interrupt my school life a lot. Like I'd be out like weeks of school just from concussion.
CT Brown is a retired professional player who also had his fair share of concussions throughout his 8 seasons in the NHL. Being in the league for almost 10 years, Brown learned the ability to trust himself as a player when it came to concussions.
You're not doing a whole lot. You're sitting in a room and just kind of resting. You're fatigued and tired, and obviously once you start slowly, they have a step-by-step process to get back, and it's whether it's hey, go do a 5-minute bike today and we'll see how you feel. Then the next day if you feel good, maybe it's a 10-minute bike, and then slowly working your way up to like a full exertion. Obviously, but if there's ever a step back or you start feeling those symptoms again, you kind of have to reel yourself back in. I think that's the important part too, is you have to trust your body, trust yourself.
Loss of balance, big one that always seemed to stick around for me. Memory loss has been a kind of a thing. Short term, I have trouble remembering stuff. But I haven't noticed much like longing effects so far, but that could be later in life.
Professional sports leagues have concussion protocols, which a player must pass in order to start playing again after a bad hit or fall. However, Brown says improvements are still needed.
Cleared concussion protocol, and I knew I wasn't good. So I could have gone back and played, but I think that's one of the instances where I got older and I got smarter. Sometimes you say, oh, I'm just okay, I want to play, but as I got older, you kind of realize the importance of your brain. As terrible as that sounds, like it takes that long, or getting a concussion to kind of realize it's not something you want to mess with, and I had to say like, hey, I'm not ready. Even though I can pass the test, something doesn't feel right with me.
Although no evidence shows that athletes playing with an active concussion multiplies their risk of developing CTE later in life, there is backed up research that shows longer careers in ice hockey can lead to CTE. Dr. Robert Cantu is the current neurosurgeon at the Concussion Center at Emerson Hospital in Massachusetts. He has been treating and studying athletes with head injuries for about 4 decades, and he co-founded the CTE Center at Boston University.
Chronic traumatic encephalopathy is defined by abnormal protein called tau, a hyperphosphorylated form of it, that is toxic to axons and nerve cells and causes them over time to disintegrate and die. So once CTE starts occurring, meaning this hyperphosphorylated tau starts forming within the brain, in most people's brains, we think it's progressive and continues, and over time gets worse, and over time can cause death.
Though CTE cannot be officially diagnosed until after death, a person's behavior can be informative, as Sarah Kribis, a clinical assistant professor at the University of Florida Department of Orthopedic Surgery and Sports Medicine, explains.
The most common symptoms are definitely the behavioral changes. The first kind of initial symptoms are similar to concussion, where you can get kind of difficulty concentrating or some kind of mood kind of destabilizing, where they're more anxious or feeling a little bit more depressed.
Concussions can be inevitable in life. They can happen in car accidents or falls, but playing a physical sport like hockey multiplies the risk of having one. The BU CTE Center discovered that they found CTE in 40% of the athletes who died before the age of 30. So what can be done to improve player safety?
Once you acknowledge that there's the potential inherent risk or that there's a problem, once you acknowledge it, then you can start to do something about it.
Educating not only the athlete, but also educating coaches, educating, like athletic trainers, parents, like all of that is so important.
Knowledge of repeated blows to the head that can lead to repeated injuries to the brain, right? And what sort of symptoms might people need to be looking for to acknowledge that there's a potential concern with a brain injury, And then second, be willing to then sit out the amount of time that's required to let the brain heal.
In the 21st century, the National Hockey League has started to take proactive steps to equip its players and coaching staff to detect signs of concussion more effectively. In 2019, the NHLPA created a concussion awareness video.
It's like a video that everybody has to watch, kind of going over the signs of concussion, what the process to get back to play will be, but as far as, that's usually pretty much it. There's a couple, they have placards around, different rinks and stuff, like in the locker room, that's like asking, do you have concussion, are these your symptoms type thing. But a lot of the communication is, after a hit and then going through and talking with your medical staff and kind of just running through the checklists.
In youth hockey, some education about concussions happens through documents sent to parents.
You get a contract and it lists all the club rules and expectations of the players, and you'll have medical forms, and there's I believe it's a 2-page form for concussion awareness. A serious lack of education. Usually at the beginning of the seasons, coaches talk to parents, and it's a prime opportunity to present them with information. And I know it's a lot, and everybody's just so excited to get out there and start winning games, and you get really caught up in the hype of it. Unless you have a really good coach, specifically for us, it was a goalie coach that was aware of it being an issue. You don't have much support from like the coaching staff or rink facilities or managers or anything like that. It's kind of, it sounds mean, but it's like they don't seem to think it's an issue.
Whenever they're amateur or professional, hockey leagues need to do more to monitor concussions in CTE.
For each season, so they have a baseline. So if something happens, if a protocol happens, then they get tested against that baseline protocol.
You do a baseline every year, the walking, so they do an immediate baseline. There's also a computer baseline test that kind of shows how far you are off from your baseline in the previous, and they do a lot of, whether it's a lot of memorization things, reading, reacting, clicking. I think one of the ones that's actually kind of difficult, the color, there'll be a word, so let's say red, and then if it's red, the actual color red, then you can click that one, but it might say red, but it's in the color green. So like they're trying to trick your brain into different situations. So you have to find the pattern, which word as soon as you do it, and click the right button. So it kind of tests a lot of your cognitive skills, but it does it with a computer, so it does reaction time.
Widespread baseline test used in hockey leagues is not the only one that exists. Several tests can be done in a doctor's office, like the Sports Concussion Assessment Tool. The SCAT, as it's often called, is a standardized test to evaluate concussions, which includes a neck evaluation and a balance assessment, among other elements.
There's something called the SCAT, so we run patients through the SCAT. There's also something called the VOMS, which is a vestibular ocular motor testing. There's something called the BESS, which is a balance assessment. So we do all of those at kind of their initial visit with us, and then we'll repeat them throughout, and we repeat it again when they are asymptomatic to see. And a lot of the high schools that we cover, and even the colleges that we cover, will already have baseline testing that they take at the beginning of the season before any head injuries have occurred. So then we at least have a baseline to say, okay, now that I'm seeing you your first visit after concussion, you were initially in August, had like a perfect score, and now you have 5 points off for this thing or that thing. So we have something to compare it to.
Surprisingly, considering its status as the premier professional hockey league in the world, the NHL has some of the most thorough concussion education among North American hockey leagues. Beyond the concussion videos JT Brown mentioned, the league distributes educational brochures, hangs concussion posters, and hosts educational meetings. The baseline tests are also thorough, including a SCAT app, impact, and paper pencil testing. However, more still needs to be done.
The National Hockey League has done a good job. What I don't think it's done a good job at all is acknowledging that CTE exists from repetitive head trauma, and that the way to minimize it is minimize the number of hits to the head and the severity of hits to the head. And I realize that unfortunately this is caught up with a legal system. There's liability involved and all of those issues. And so even if somebody fully understood something behind their own library's door, they don't want to admit it necessarily out in public.
Yet speaking out is a necessary step to changing things.
I think anytime anytime you have more people, whether it's speaking out about it, donating, pledging to donate their brain, obviously getting more scientific evidence on it, I think you're definitely going to have a bigger platform to speak on, and more people are going to be aware of it. I think there's definitely challenges still, in educating people on CTE.
Dr. Cantu explained that monitoring how many hits hockey players take in a game would be helpful. It can be done thanks to a device called an accelerometer.
I do think the monitoring device of an accelerometer just alone is useful, not in determining concussion, but in determining the number of hits and the severity of hits that somebody's had. And if somebody is being shown to have an unusual number of hits, they probably should be studied to see if there's something in the way they're playing the sports that putting themselves at increased risk.
Research on concussions and CTE has been growing, but a lot remains to be done in great part because people cannot be used for this research. Instead, brains need to be donated after death. At the end of 2024, the Boston University Brain Bank had over 1,600 brain donations. Many more will be needed to advance the research.
We're not going to be able to treat or prevent CTE until we can not only diagnose it, right, but also recognize it. But even before that, we have to teach people that this is a problem.